Welcome to the Chill Insight. It's a special edition of The Deep Dive, and we're going to be looking at the psychology behind New Year's resolutions. That time of year,
Yeah.
when we're all going to become marathon runners and
Oh,
gourmet chefs, fluent in like 5 different languages,
right.
all before Valentine's Day.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but
Yeah.
let's be honest. Those resolutions can feel pretty daunting. And by February, most of us are back to our comfy routines, wondering where all the motivation went. So to help us understand why we set ourselves up for these cycles of ambition and recalibrating expectations, I've got our expert here today to guide us through all the psychology of it all.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring the concept of false hope syndrome
Fine.
today and how it relates to those ambitious goals we set for ourselves every January 1st.
Yes, it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's very relevant as we head into a new year. A lot of us are already starting to think about, those changes we want to make, those better versions of ourselves we aspire to be.
Totally. So let's start with the basics. Why are we so drawn to self-improvement in the first place? What is it about the idea of change that's so appealing to us?
Yeah. Well, I think it taps into a fundamental human desire to grow and evolve. We're kind of wired to seek out challenges and strive for progress. And we often associate those changes with positive outcomes like better health, greater happiness, increased success, things like that.
Yeah, it's that classic new year, new me mentality.
Yeah.
We envision these idealized versions of ourselves. And we believe that making certain changes, we can bridge the gap between who we are and who we want to be.
Exactly. And there's also an element of control. Like making changes, even small ones, can give us a sense of agency over our lives.
Yeah.
Especially during times of uncertainty or transition, it's empowering to feel like we're actively shaping our destinies instead of just passively letting life happen to us.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I know for me, even just like organizing my desk or finally cleaning out my inbox, it can make me feel like I'm on top of things,
Right.
like I'm actually accomplishing something.
And you know what? Even those seemingly insignificant acts of self-improvement can have a positive impact on our well-being. Research has shown that taking small steps towards change, like finally making that doctor's appointment you've been putting off, or, something like that, can boost our mood and reduce stress. It's a reminder that we're not powerless. We can take action to improve our lives.
That's encouraging. It's like those small wins can build momentum and create a positive feedback loop.
Absolutely. But here's where things get interesting. If we're so motivated to change, why do so many of us struggle to actually make those changes stick? Why do those grand New Year's resolutions often fizzle out before February even arrives?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like we set ourselves up for this cycle of excitement and then disappointment. We start with the best of intentions. But somewhere along the way, our motivation wanes and we fall back into old habits.
Exactly, and that's where the concept of realistic versus unrealistic expectations comes into play. We often sabotage our own efforts by setting goals that are simply unattainable, or by failing to acknowledge the true difficulty of the changes that we're trying to make.
So it's not just about willpower then, or finding the right self-improvement program. It's more about being honest with ourselves about what's actually achievable.
Exactly. Think about the classic example of weight loss. People often set unrealistic expectations in 4 key areas: the amount of weight they want to lose, the speed at which they want to lose it, the ease with which they think they can achieve it, and the impact they believe it'll have on other areas of their lives.
I see where you're going with this. We tend to overestimate our abilities
Yeah.
and underestimate the challenges involved.
Precisely. And there's this fascinating study that perfectly illustrates this. Researchers asked a group of obese women to define their weight loss goals, including their dream weight, their happy weight, and even their disappointed weight.
I'm curious to hear what they considered disappointing. What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
Well, on average, their goal weights required a loss of 32% of their body weight. And what's even more revealing is that they considered a 37-pound weight loss to be disappointing.
Wow. That's a significant amount of weight to lose. It just highlights how high our expectations can be, even when we think we're being realistic.
Exactly. And this study really underscores the importance of understanding the social and cultural factors that influence our self-perceptions and shape our expectations. We're constantly bombarded with messages about ideal body types, quick fixes, effortless transformations, which can really distort our view of what's actually attainable and healthy.
Yeah, it's like we're setting ourselves up for disappointment from the get-go by buying into these unrealistic ideals.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of false hope syndrome, which is a term coined by researchers Janet Polivy and C. Peter Herman to describe the cycle of, setting ourselves up for self-change attempts, that are ultimately doomed to fail.
Okay, let's dive into that a little bit more. What exactly does false hope syndrome entail, and how does it relate to those ambitious New Year's resolutions we often set for ourselves?
So, false hope syndrome has three main components: overestimating our abilities, setting unrealistic goals, and having poor coping skills for dealing with setbacks. It's that initial burst of optimism, that belief that this time will be different, that often fuels our resolutions. But as we've been talking about, that optimism can stem from a very distorted view of how difficult change actually is.
So we're essentially setting ourselves up for failure, but not acknowledging the challenges that we're likely to face.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the psychology behind false hope syndrome is so crucial. It's not about blaming ourselves for lacking willpower or motivation. It's about recognizing that our minds can sometimes play tricks on us, leading us to believe that change will be easier than it actually is.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like we're peeling back the layers of our own minds to understand why we struggle with self-change. But let's pause here for a moment. And when we come back, we'll delve deeper into those specific components of false hope syndrome and how they actually play out in the context of New Year's resolutions.
So, as we were saying before, those three main components that kind of contribute to this cycle of self sabotage: overestimating our abilities, setting unrealistic goals, and having poor coping skills.
So it's not just about having the desire to change then. It's about having a realistic grasp of what it takes to actually make those changes stick.
Exactly. And that's where that second component of false hope syndrome comes in: setting unrealistic goals. We often get caught up in the excitement of a new year, a fresh start, and we set these grand, sweeping resolutions without really considering the logistics, the day-to-day effort that's required to actually achieve them.
Right? It's like we're so focused on the end goal, that idealized version of ourselves, that we kind of overlook those smaller incremental steps that are necessary to get there.
Exactly. And this is where self-change programs can sometimes contribute to false hope syndrome as well. They often make these inflated promises, touting quick fixes and effortless transformations, which further fuels our unrealistic expectations.
So it's like they're selling us a dream, but they're not always upfront about the sweat and effort that's required behind the scenes.
Right. And even when we do acknowledge the need for effort, we often underestimate the time that it takes to see real lasting change. We live in a culture of instant gratification, where we expect to see results quickly. But, true self-improvement, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, it's about building sustainable habits, not just chasing those quick fixes.
Exactly. And that brings us to that third component of false hope syndrome: poor coping skills. When we inevitably encounter setbacks, which we all do, we often lack the strategies to deal with them in a healthy and productive way.
So instead of seeing the setbacks as just temporary bumps in the road,
Yeah.
we kind of interpret them as signs that we're failing, like we're not good enough.
Exactly. And this is where those cognitive distortions we talked about earlier can really take hold. We fall into that all or nothing thinking, where one slip up makes us feel like we've ruined everything and we just give up on our goals entirely.
Ugh, I've definitely been there. It's like that one piece of cake or that one missed workout suddenly becomes this like symbol of complete failure.
Right. That's what researchers call the what the hell effect. It's that feeling of, well, I've already messed up, so why bother trying anymore? And it can lead to this downward spiral of self-sabotage.
Yeah, so instead of seeing that one misstep as a learning opportunity, we allow it to just derail our entire effort. It's like we're giving our brains permission to give up.
Exactly. And this type of thinking can apply to all sorts of self-change goals, not just diet-related ones. Think about procrastination. You miss one deadline, and suddenly you feel like a complete failure, so you just give up on the entire project. Or you're trying to learn a new language, but you're struggling with a particular grammar concept, and then you start to doubt your ability to ever become fluent.
Wow, it's amazing how powerful those negative thought patterns can be. Like our brains are wired to focus on the setbacks, even when we're making progress overall.
Right, and that's the ironic thing about self-change. The more we try to suppress certain thoughts or behaviors, the more prominent they become, especially when we're under stress. There's a theory called the ironic process theory that explains this phenomenon.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, so basically it suggests that when we try to suppress a thought, we actually have to think about it in order to know what we're suppressing. So for example, if you're trying to quit smoking, and you're constantly telling yourself, don't think about cigarettes, you're actually bringing the thought of cigarettes to the forefront of your mind.
So it's like a reverse psychology trick that our brains are playing on us.
Exactly. And when we're stressed or distracted, our cognitive resources are depleted. And those unwanted thoughts can easily slip through the cracks of our willpower. It's like our brains are working against us, even when we're trying our best to stay on track.
So if we're constantly battling these cognitive distortions and these ironic processes, is there even any hope for us to achieve lasting change? I mean, it can feel pretty discouraging to realize how much our own minds can sabotage our efforts.
That's an excellent question and a very valid concern. But the answer is yes, there is hope. But it's not about relying on willpower alone. It's about shifting from false hope to real hope and understanding the difference between the two.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Real hope sounds a lot more sustainable than false hope. But what does real hope actually look like in the context of self-change?
Well, it starts with recognizing that true self-improvement is a journey, not a destination. It's about making gradual, sustainable changes over time, not expecting overnight transformations.
So it's more about building those healthy habits than striving for perfection. It's about acknowledging that there will be bumps along the way, and that's okay.
Exactly. And it's about being kind to ourselves along the way. You know, we're all human, we're all going to make mistakes. The key is to learn from those mistakes and keep moving forward.
That sounds a lot less daunting than that whole false hope cycle we were talking about before. It's like taking the pressure off ourselves to be perfect and just focusing on making progress one step at a time.
Precisely. And that's what makes real hope so empowering. It's not about denying the challenges of self-change, but it's about believing in our ability to navigate those challenges and ultimately achieve our goals.
Yeah, okay, I'm starting to get this. But how do we actually cultivate this real hope? Where do we even begin?
The first step is to be honest with ourselves about the difficulty of the change we're trying to make. It's about acknowledging that it's going to take effort, time, and probably a few bumps in the road along the way.
So no more setting those wildly unrealistic goals that are practically guaranteed to set us up for failure. No more promising ourselves we'll lose 20 pounds in a month or learn a new language in a week.
Exactly. Instead, focus on setting smaller, more achievable goals that build upon each other over time.
So it's more about building momentum than trying to sprint to the finish line. It's about creating sustainable change, not just chasing those quick fixes.
Precisely. Think of it like training for a marathon. You wouldn't expect to run 26 miles on your first day of training, would you? You'd start with shorter runs, gradually increasing your distance and endurance over time. And you would need proper training support and the right equipment to succeed.
I see the analogy. So it's the same principle with self-change. We need to start small and build up our self-improvement muscles gradually.
Exactly. And just like a marathon runner needs proper training and support, we need to equip ourselves with the tools and resources to succeed in our self-change journey. That includes developing strong coping skills for dealing with setbacks. Because let's face it, they're inevitable.
So what are some examples of those coping skills? What are some things we can do to prepare ourselves for those inevitable bumps in the road?
Well, it could be things like mindfulness techniques for managing stress, having a supportive network of friends or family to turn to when things get tough, or seeking professional guidance from a therapist or counselor. It's about recognizing our own needs and having a plan in place for when we inevitably stumble.
It's interesting how you emphasize the importance of social support. It's like we often try to tackle these self-improvement challenges in isolation, which can make them feel even more overwhelming.
Absolutely. And there's research to back that up. One study found that dieters who believed in their dieting abilities, who had that genuine self-efficacy, were more successful at resisting temptations. And that belief often stems from having a supportive environment where they feel encouraged and understood.
So it's not just about having the skills then. It's about having the belief in ourselves that we can actually use those skills effectively. And that belief can be bolstered by the people around us. It's like having a cheering section for our self-improvement journey.
Exactly. It's about cultivating both internal and external resources to support our self-change efforts. It's about recognizing that we don't have to do this alone, and that seeking help when we need it is a sign of strength, not weakness.
This has been so eye-opening. It's amazing how much we can learn from simply understanding the psychology behind our own behavior. This conversation has been really insightful. It's like we've been given this behind-the-scenes look at how our own minds can sometimes work against us when it comes to self-improvement.
Yeah, I agree. And understanding the psychology behind our self-change attempts can be really empowering. It's not about blaming ourselves for past failures, but rather about equipping ourselves with the knowledge and tools to make more informed and sustainable changes in the future.
Right. So as we're kind of heading into a new year,
Yeah.
a time when a lot of us are starting to think about those resolutions and goals, what are some key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own self-improvement journeys?
Well, the first and perhaps most important takeaway is to just be mindful of the false hope syndrome and those three components we talked about: overestimating our abilities, setting unrealistic goals, and having poor coping skills. It's about recognizing that change takes time, effort, and a willingness to adapt and adjust our approach along the way.
So instead of aiming for this complete overhaul of our lives overnight, maybe we should focus on setting smaller, more manageable goals that are actually achievable. It's about building momentum through those small wins, right?
Precisely. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress one step at a time. It's about celebrating those small victories along the way, even if it's just resisting that second slice of cake or making it to the gym twice this week instead of once.
Yeah, those small wins can be so important. They help us build confidence and reinforce those healthy habits we're trying to establish. It's like we're proving to ourselves that we can do it one step at a time.
Exactly. And that sense of accomplishment, that belief in our own ability to succeed, is what psychologists call self-efficacy. And research has shown that self-efficacy is a key predictor of success in all areas of life, including self-improvement.
So the more we believe in our ability to achieve our goals, the more likely we are to actually achieve them.
Yeah.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to cultivate that sense of self-efficacy. And one way to do that is by setting ourselves up for success from the start. That means setting realistic goals, breaking those goals down into smaller, more manageable steps, and developing those coping strategies for dealing with setbacks.
Right. And it also means being kind to ourselves along the way, acknowledging that, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. It's about seeing those mistakes as learning opportunities, not as signs that we're failing.
Absolutely. Self-compassion is crucial for sustainable self-improvement. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a close friend or loved one.
That's such an important reminder. It's so easy to be hard on ourselves, especially when we're trying to change.
Yeah.
But beating ourselves up doesn't really help anyone. It just makes the journey harder.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to shift from a mindset of self-criticism to a mindset of self-compassion. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, and that's okay.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on New Year's resolutions and the psychology of self-change. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure. And I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. What if, instead of making these grand resolutions, we focused on cultivating one small positive habit in the new year? Something simple, sustainable, and truly meaningful to you.
I love that. It's like a much gentler and perhaps more effective approach to self-improvement. It takes the pressure off
Yeah.
and allows us to really focus on building a solid foundation for lasting change.
Exactly. And who knows, that one small habit could have a ripple effect, inspiring other positive changes in your life.
Very well said. And on that note, we want to thank you all for joining us for this special edition of The Deep Dive, The Chill Insight. We wish you all the best in your journeys of self-discovery and growth in the new year. Remember, real change starts with real hope, and real hope is within your reach.